Mike, you have worked in multiple mediums for
Yes.
years now. How do you describe your art practice?
Sound and noise. It's
Mm.
all based on it if it's not sculptural, visual, or oral. It's all about sound and noise.
And what
And I see, yes.
what drew you to that? Like, how did you come to that conclusion?
Well, people say I'm loud, but um, that part, well, it's just because it reflects through most of my work, right? So when I make paintings, which I started doing again during COVID pretty heavily, they were all based on my response to pieces of music. So I found myself listening to a lot of music, shuffling the phone and going through like the 20,000 songs there, and then I would just be listening, and then all of a sudden something would hit me, and then I would just put that song on repeat, and then start drawing on my computer around it, and then that would generate itself into a drawing, which I'd eventually make into a painting. It's just sort of my the way I felt about the work, or how I saw it, and since I listened to mainly contemporary new music in a lot of senses, there's this relationship to abstract expressionism that came out of, let's say, the bop jazz era, which from was something that's very big in my, like, I like jazz a lot as I make jazz and stuff. So it all kind of comes from out of that, I guess. And then sound, experimenting with sound was something that I did since I was a teenager.
Yeah, it goes way
So
back. I can remember conversations you and I had in the mid 1980s. You were
yes.
probably the first person I ever heard use the word turntablism.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, yeah. It's when I discovered Christian Marclay, and that's when the word came out. I didn't know people did what I was doing, and I wasn't really. I guess I wish I had all the original cassettes from the '70s that I had done in my bedroom with my friends, where I was like scratching records and stuff. Nobody was scratching records in the '70s. Everybody looked at me weird, like, "Why are you wrecking your records?" And it's just like, because it sounded better.
Did you find that as a kid that you were just interested in sound in different ways beyond just putting a record on?
Maybe, maybe I always felt that I didn't really fit in most places. Like, you grew up in the same town,
Mm.
in Bramalea. It's like a place where I never felt I fit in.
Yeah.
So I did what I did, but then in public I tried to be normal,
Yeah.
and it never seemed to work. So
Yeah, I was
because
going
I
to say, how did that work out?
it didn't. I didn't play hockey.
Yeah.
You grew up in Bramalea, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And if you didn't play hockey, at least when I'm a little older than you,
Mm.
and if you didn't play hockey, you didn't fit in.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. And that wasn't just Bramley, Brampton, right? That was a whole,
Yeah.
a whole lot of different towns like that. And did you always think about art as a living, or did that come later?
No, well, when I was a teenager, I wanted to be an illustrator
Mm.
and doing graphic type work. So I did a lot of printing and things at school. So I created all the posters for everything that went on in the school and things like that. But at the same time, I was a programmer on the school radio station we had, which ran out of this little closet and ran into the cafeteria.
Hmm. I did the same thing.
Yep.
Yep.
And then I let it all go, and I wanted to be a club DJ, and that never happened. And then I discovered CKLN, and that's where we met.
Hmm.
And then, music really, since I guess I bought my first record when I was about 11 or 12. And Before that, I had been given records, you know, as Christmas gifts, sort of things. But when I bought my first one, that was sort of the addiction started.
You remember what it was?
Hmm.
You remember what it was?
Oh yeah, James Taylor, Sweet Baby James. I know, hard to believe, isn't it? But
Oh, no, it's of that period, right?
yeah, yeah. Well, it was pop music of its day.
Mhm.
What was your first record?
The first record I ever had was Wipeout.
Oh, okay, the Safaris.
Yeah.
Yeah, my first record I ever had was Shades of Deep Purple. Shades of Purple by Deep Purple. That was given to me. My dad's best friend worked at Polydor Records.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, yeah. So I had a lead on that stuff.
Mm. You still buy records?
Oh yeah,
Mhm.
about not too many new ones. They're too expensive.
Yeah.
I buy a lot of used records. Oh yeah,
Dude, it's no fun buying records. It's all about the artifacts, right? It's the records
yeah,
that have the history.
yeah. I agree. I agree. Well, see, I got rid of so many of my records at one point in my life because I couldn't move them anymore. They were just too heavy and too cumbersome. And so, like, I must have. I had a big record sale at my one of my lofts. It was $1 a disc,
Mhm.
and I had put out maybe 90 milk cartons of records, and still had 60 left. So I just kept the jazz ones and the art ones, right, and then got rid of all the rest.
You should explain what CKLN is. We've got viewers and listeners all over the world. So, talk a little bit about your experience there and what the place meant to you.
Oh, well, that was a real growing experience all the way around in my life. Though it was incredibly frustrating too, because I was in the management part and I was sort of like the oddball because I was a cisgendered white male. So that was kind of, and that was way before any of this woke things happened, right? I guess CKLN was wide awake in the 80s and into the 90s. But no, it was a really important place for me. It allowed me to really get a wide berth of knowledge when it came to music, but also working with different community groups and opening up the notions of diversity.
Mm.
Because I didn't grow up in diversity. I grew up in Bramalea.
I mean, the shorthand for, I guess, what CKLN was in those days at least, was college radio. But that really didn't do it justice, right? Because as you're saying, for me, I started to see it in the early 90s. The place really
Yeah.
transformed into a social organization more than a music organization.
Yeah, it changed its mandate from college radio to community radio. So its goal at that point was to give voice to other communities that weren't getting voice, which was very interesting because I was sort of like the first person people met there because I trained everybody how to be on air and taught them how to work the equipment and everything. So it was very interesting to see how people saw the station. So BIPOC community saw it as a BIPOC station. Gay community saw it as a gay station. Punkers saw it as a punk rock station. Hip hoppers saw it as a dance station. So it was very interesting how each community was able to identify itself with the station and what they took out of it, which was very interesting to me.
I've always, to come back to you and your work, I've always been fascinated to watch your career develop, Mike, because I think I was there around the time that you first committed yourself to being an artist full time.
Yes, yes.
And the thing that always struck me was just how difficult a decision that must have been. Um, the challenge, just the practical challenges, right, of making a living as an artist. What was that like?
Very difficult, still is.
Mm.
Still is. You know, I subsidize my incomes through doing other things. Right now, I go and build people decks and fix their ceilings and stuff, right? But I don't need a lot of money to survive because I was fortunate enough to, when I had money and was doing better as an artist, not that I'm doing bad, but it's just the system has changed, that I was able to invest money in things like real estate.
Mhm.
right? So, like, I was able to buy a house early. And with that, has been able to get to a point now where I don't have a mortgage in my life. So, like during COVID, when I was making $2,000 a month from the government because I couldn't work outside of like doing my handyman type things, I felt prosperously. It's hard to believe that somebody can live on $24,000 a year or 25,000 in that area, but when you're not paying a mortgage or rent, it really makes a big difference.
But how it affects the work itself. The curious about the pros and cons of being fully committed to it, having the time to commit to it,
Yeah.
but then the pressure that comes with making ends meet. How has all of that impacted your work?
Well, I try not to let it. I still make work for me
Mm,
and only for me. And if other people like it, that's a great bonus. So I still live that artist lifestyle that way. I don't gear my work to other people. I make my work for me, and then if people like it, they hopefully purchase it. And it's been working out somewhat okay. You know, I still sell a painting or two every month, and occasionally I sell some music, and I've sold a bunch of the concrete record box sets. So like when one of those sells, that's a little bit of money coming into the pocket. So I don't live an extravagant lifestyle,
fair
but
enough.
I live better than most.
You're referring to Paradox, which was just a brilliant idea.
Oh, thank you.
Music concretes, beautiful recordings. Each of the pieces, absolutely love them, but
Thank you.
issued on concrete discs.
Yes. Yeah,
Tell,
that kind of blew people away.
tell the story.
Oh, well, that was. I like to transform things out of what they're supposed to be. As an improviser, generally, I try to extend whatever instrumentation I'm working in, right? So when it comes to art, that's an instrument. So it's about trying to, how can I expand on what people expect and then give them something hopefully they don't, which was the concrete records, which took a long time to make. And they were expensive too because I made the recordings, but then I had to get the recordings cut somewhere onto a record so I can make the molds to make the concrete. And then it took, oh God, probably over half a year to figure out the right concrete mix to make them work without them just crumbling and falling apart, or to make them that they were somewhat cleanly playable,
Mhm.
right? So that sort of thing. But it's this idea of trying to move out of what can be expected. Like when people make a record, they do a vinyl record, or they do, like all of us, MP3s or digital files, and then sell this ephemeral object that doesn't truly exist to people, like an NFT. I guess those were the first NFTs, was music, but I guess yeah. I never thought of that. The MP3 is the first non-fungible token.
Yeah.
But this was to, I like objects, right? So as an artist, I like creating objects. So this was, I thought it was an interesting way to take my music and make it into an object outside of the realm of a cassette and a regular record,
Mhm.
or a non-fungible token in the terms of in an MP3 or a
On,
digital file.
yeah, so on that, the idea of the object um, and your record collection.
Yeah.
Um, what's your take on streaming services and how they're impacting the way young people listen to music?
Oh, well, yeah, okay. I appreciate what they're doing. They're allowing people access to this world that they normally would be budgeted against, right? You can only buy so much. But at the same time, it's changed how we listen and where music fits within the spectrum of one's life.
Mhm.
So when I was a kid, I went out and bought an album. And I listened to that whole album from side to side. And then, like most of us, because we only had so few and you constantly built that up, you listen to that record a lot, right? Now, with things like Spotify, as an example of a streaming service, I guess the most popular one, people don't listen to albums anymore. They listen to the one song, and that's all they listen to. And I find that a bit troubling because it's discounting the rest of the record, which could be even better than what some executive deemed as being the 45 for the single, right? So it's changed how we digest music, and I don't know if it's for the positive. But
how people write music too, right? Because you've got to grab the listener much earlier on in the piece. There are no one's writing slow builds anymore, right? Because you just get skipped by.
yeah. There's no drama. It has to be a hook
Right.
within the first 15 seconds, or they're going to go to another song.
Yeah.
Yeah. So things like the long, monumental pieces of music that started to come out with concept records in the 60s and then developed hugely in the 70s with progressive rock. And then jazz took it over in the 80s with long pieces of music, and then experimental music in this millennium. But there's no real resource or no audience for it that's willing to go past. Like, the world is based on TikTok now, and which is what, 30 seconds? So if you don't make your message in 30 seconds, you lose the viewer, and so you lose the listener.
Field is wonderful. Congratulations. This too has got a connection between music and visual art.
Yeah, it's based off of color field painting. Okay, so this comes from a call that came out for music based on Washington, D.C. color field painters. So I did the research on the painters, found some paintings, and started to create the music, and then I was just too slow and never got it into the call. So life, I guess, got in the way, or I didn't feel it was right to go out at the time. So that's why it's released now, because it never made the call. And I thought, God, these are really good pieces. Let's put them out.
Excellent.
You know. Oh, thank you. They're really fun to do. They're very electroacoustic works.
And so you're credited on these for turntable and live processing. Tell us about how the work came together.
What do you mean, the live processing?
Yeah.
Or yeah. So I have a series of effects pedals and things that I run everything through. So I start to build up loops and layers, and then keep processing each layer until I find what I really want in the sound. And then it's all live. It's all like, I don't go into it later. I go in and maybe edit some things out here and there.
You mentioned Christian Marley earlier.
Yeah.
And, turntablism has been with us for so long. I'm curious how you see yourself in that continuum of work. In the history of turntablism, where does Mike Hansen show up?
Yeah, that's an odd one. I've never thought of it. I didn't even know people really knew who I was, other than a small select community, like mainly locally, like, here in Ontario and Toronto and stuff. And then that article came out in Bandcamp, which really freaked me out. Like, all of a sudden I get this thing. There's this article, because I'm on Bandcamp, so I get all that press stuff, and it's on turntablism. So I decide I'll flip through it, right? And then I find myself in it. It freaked me out. So I guess I'm in better spot than I ever thought I was. I guess I'm in that mid-school turntablism thing, out of Marley with references to Cage, who I guess could be seen as one of the first turntablists. But then it's funny because I remember reading a passage from a book about this guy who was in a ship in the Arctic, and he had like 4 record players that he had in his room. And the day they first saw the sun again after 6 months of darkness, he played 4 records at once. And that was my first written reference to a time in turntabling to the early 1900s, where somebody was actually like playing records on top of records, right? In a sense. So for me, where do I fit? Like I said, Marley blew my mind. I was doing it when I was a kid, but I didn't know I was doing anything other than being weird. So where do I fit in this? I guess I'm in that midsection. I'm a processor because I process my stuff, so I sort of push it more electroacoustically, but at the same time, I'm not a dance-driven person. I time and beats and all that sort of stuff doesn't really fit into my oeuvre. And I'm down to 1 record player with 2 tone arms rather than being 4 record players like when I first started, sort of imitating Christian Marley. And then I grew up and created my own voice.
Where do you find a turntable with 2 tone arms?
You make it.
Tell us how.
Well, I use old caliphones, right? Like that I will give to Marley. Like I love the caliphones. So they're a beautiful object to me. And so what I did was I managed one time. I go to an artist residency in Newfoundland quite regularly. So when records were sort of losing their flavor in the world, I went around to schools and asked if they had any old record players. And they would take me into the gym under the stage and go take them. And there were like skids of old caliphones. So I took those and then I shipped them back to Toronto and started messing around with them, like taking them apart, building. Like I have a fairly famous sound installation called Itch, which has been all across the country in a lot of artist centers and museums. And it has 12 record players set up. And each record player has a different, like, they have one of 4 labels, either red, yellow, blue, or green. And then I created a very simple but effective flash program that projected colors up on a screen. So when your color showed up, you were invited to do whatever you wanted with the record player. And so the playing was basically controlled by the computer, which was the conductor showing these colors. And then people were invited, though nobody ever looked at the screen, they just had fun. And that was great. But that all came out of the caliphone, using caliphones, because they were totally self-contained. They have their own speakers in them. They're designed to be abused because they were for schools and dance studios, right? So, and then from there, I got tired of carrying around so much equipment. Like, I have total respect for flute players. Not that I'm a big flute player guy, but I like the fact, or singers, man, it's right there, right? You just carry this. It makes life easier. But I just got tired of carrying around all this equipment. So I tore one apart and made it smaller, because caliphones are like really deep. So I cut it all back, built a new box for it, and disconnected all the amplification systems in it, and took the record player, then took a tone arm from another caliphone, drilled a hole, placed it in, and then wired them into 1/4-inch jacks. And so you put in a cable, run it to the mixer, and then each level of the mixer is a tone arm.
So your turntablism's handyman.